Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our final Charter Review Committee meeting. Like we just have quorum, but we should have some more folks joining us.
I hope you and Shelby are like going out for drinks after this to celebrate.
If they have Xfinity, they do not have any internet. Because I'm over at John Cook's house because I have no internet. It went down about 40 minutes ago.
I'm her cooling center.
Yes, my call center. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Sure.
they're doing upgrades around the area because they did mine last week, so it's like in pockets.
Well, all of that just went out. Everything. I mean, everything.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
My,
I mean,
my house would have been
landline.
closer.
I even have a landline in it. The landline went out. So
I don't think Shelby and I are gonna get a drink after this, but it sounds like John and Margaret should. Just a minute. It is 5:30, and as always, this meeting is being recorded as well as live streamed via Boxcast and will be available for folks to view on YouTube after this meeting, along with our previous 14. And just, I know, I've said this a million times, if you wouldn't mind using the raise hand function. It's down in the bottom under the reactions tab. You can click raise hand, and now they have the handy raise your hand, and your computer knows that, and will raise your hand for you. So just, I know it is incredibly hot right now, so I just want to check to make sure everybody is somewhere where, if you are not necessarily comfortable, you are at least safe. If you are not, please log off, get somewhere safe. We will connect with you in some other fashion.
yeah, no.
Everyone, so we're good. Okay. So for our last meeting, we just have a couple of things we want to go through, but the most important is we're going to review our charter shell top to bottom, make sure that there's no last lingering issues. Thank you. Several of you have sent in typos and commas and clarifying questions, and we've made some changes over the last few days in response to those. Thank you very much for the very, very thorough review. So going into our charter shell. I'll make this a little bit bigger so it's easier to read. So we have our preamble that we had set during the last meeting. Any last questions around the preamble? We moved a couple comments. All right, so Article 1, name and boundaries. I think the only thing that may have changed was changes to Charter 2024. There were some places that were still assuming a November ballot. So they said November 2023, or that the enactment date would be in January 1, 2024, but those have been shifted. A couple of folks reached out about that one. Other than that, none of this here in named boundaries has changed for a while. In powers of the city, Article 2, this also has not seen any changes in a while. Powers of the city, construction, where powers vest. This is all the legal must-haves for our city charter. Any questions? Going into Article 3, this is maybe the most substantive change this group is recommending, which is that the council would be comprised of a mayor and 6 councilors nominated and elected from the city at large. And we did spend quite a bit of time in breakout rooms, both discussing the number of counselors and also how those counselors will be elected. And essentially this at large means it's the top 3 every 2 years. Any questions? Jeanette, please.
Thank you so much, Kim. Are you going like 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, and then if we have questions, we can raise them?
If you have questions about 3.1, go ahead. Otherwise, I'll go through each of the sections.
Okay, great. No, I have a question about 3.3 when that comes up. Thank you.
So 3.2 is the oath again, charter necessary, administrative. And then 3.3, this is the mayor. So we had set 4 areas for the mayor: approving the agenda, presiding, facilitating, signing authorized writings, and appointing the members of boards and committees as provided by council rules. And Jeanette, please.
Thank you. So question regarding D, appoint members of city boards and committees, because our current rules are silent to that. And part of my concern is that can be done without staff consultation or even other city council consultation, which means the mayor could be choosing the committee members and board members de facto just by themselves. And so I had a concern about that one, but want to know if there is, and I know I missed one of the meeting, so I apologize if that was discussed. And again, our current ground rules, which I'm happy to share, is silent on the appointment of city boards and committees.
Shelby, do you have any notes?
Yeah, so so actually our current charter does say the same thing, appoint members as provided by council rules. So we don't have, you're correct that the council rules don't say anything, but it is consistent with our current charter and also consistent with other charters that we've seen. So our thinking was that that would be an issue for the council to adopt by rules and not put in the charter.
Okay, I'm fine with that. I just wanted to put on record that there was some discussion that it was currently in council rules, but I did verify with the city manager it's not. So we can certainly bring it up, but I just think that could be a potential issue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's in the charter, but not in the rules. You're correct.
This may be something when rules are modified or set next time, that this would be a requirement to include in the rules, given that it's a charter requirement. John, please.
Yeah, and I know you guys change the rules every 2 years anyway, but I swear that it was in our rules that we had that. Basically, the mayor appoints them and the council just approves them. And that's the way we always did it. Whether it was actually in writing or not, but that's how we always did it for the 6 years. I have a question about A, though. It says approve the agenda for council meetings. Maybe approve's not the right word. Maybe it should be create or something else. Approve means somebody else wrote it. And technically, one of the mayor's jobs is writing the agenda and with the city manager. So I don't know if approve is the right word.
Yeah, so that was actually intentional because staff sets the agenda and council approves it. So for example, land use, or the mayor approves it. So for example, land use hearings, we didn't want the mayor to be the one to calculate the 120-day rule and figure out when the hearing is going to be. And so we thought internally at the staff level, we thought that approve the agenda gave the mayor the oversight to give kind of the thumbs up, thumbs down as to whether something was going to be put on the agenda or not. And so he or she had the ultimate control over what the council heard, but actually the day-to-day kind of, should this be this week or next week kind of thing, should be left at the administrative level.
As long as the council doesn't feel that that means that they get to create it, was my only concern.
Okay, yeah, the mayor still has that ultimate veto authority over it.
Thank you. And Margaret, please.
Yes, I think under the 3.3D with, the appoint members of the board, I think why don't we just make it clear at this meeting that the intent is that this will be something that we put in council rules. And so at least if there are questions down the road, my understanding is the intent of this group is that even though the mayor appoints members and city boards and so on, that the council rules could say that they need to go up in front of the council. So I think intent is very important.
Yes, and thank you for bringing that up. Something that Shelby and I talked about quite a bit is that if there is future consternation around some of these decisions or some of the charter things, because we've got these 15 wonderful meetings of discussion, this all becomes a legislative record. And so if there is discussion in the future, folks can come back to this.
Yeah.
And Jason, please.
Yeah, just to kind of add a little bit of context, because when John Cook's time as mayor ended, there were some minor things that we made changes around in practice a little bit, like on the edges. And one of them was around the appointing of boards and committees. I interviewed some people. I actually did not interview all board and committee members, and some of those appointments came to me as recommendations. That was just one of the time management things I decided to do. And I don't think it's written in the council rules anymore. I mean, Jeanette said it's not in the council rules now, and that doesn't surprise me. John, you also may not know, maybe you do, but there was a really significant change in the content of the council ground rules or the council rules when Steve Reimer became the city manager. Just, I'm giving you that for a time reference. That year we did a much more condensed, I would say, set of ground rules that were more just about how we were going to all interact and behave, and a lot less like a rule book, I would say. The prior versions that I participated in when you were mayor and for the first 2 years of my time as mayor were more maybe both. Like it was how you're going to conduct yourself and kind of a set of, how we're going to work together. So there was a significant change there. And I have no doubt that that if that was covered before, which I think it was, that didn't make it in the very condensed it's either 1 or 2 pages now, single spaced. It's not very long and not very thorough. So that, I think Margaret's point about saying the council, or sort of compelling the council to have a rule, maybe is a reasonable approach. I have a comment about the agenda conversation too. I'm not entirely sure approve is the only right verb there. I think maybe approve and an or set the agenda. I realize the city attorney's point, and I completely agree with her. But the way this reads to some people, it would probably read as more of a checkbox, yup kind of thing. And I think both in practice and in control of the sort of happenings of the city council, that it should probably be a little bit more than what's written there. But I guess the best I have is that approve and or set the agenda. Maybe someone's got better wordsmithing. And I know we promised we weren't going to wordsmith, but that's what I got.
If there's any synonyms. There is the word accept the agenda, which may feels, I guess, to me a little more strict, but you can continue to think about that one. All right, any other questions or comments around the mayor section? Moving into council president. So we spent quite a bit of time discussing this section, and so there's only a couple changes. So in this one, the council will, by written ballot, elect a council president at its first meeting each year. The election process remains the same from the current charter, but this does change the term of a council president from 2 years to 1 year. And then we wrote through some of the duties, basically that the council president will perform the duties of the office of mayor in the mayor's absence or if the mayor is unable to serve. And that if the council president does vacate the position, a new council president will be selected in the same manner. And Tony, please.
Sorry if we covered this quite a bit before, but when I was reading through this time, the council president will serve as the mayor. I'm sorry, will perform the mayor's duties when he's absent. I was curious if that wouldn't be better to say may, because otherwise it's saying that they have to do it, and I don't know if that's the intent. And then the other part is at the mayor's request. It as I read it this time, as well as perform other duties of the mayor at the mayor's request, it almost sounds like the mayor can give tasks to the council president and assign work to the council president. I don't know if that was really the intent there either. So that's just my two questions with that.
Tony and John, please.
Yeah, I was going to say the exact wording, I'm not sure of, could be can or may, or, will might not be the best word, but I have two things. One, I want to comment on what Tony just said is it's not just the council president that the mayor can assign it to. Let's say ribbon cuttings is the issue. So it can be the council president, but if the council president's busy or the council president's not somebody that's really a great person to do that, he can actually, she can, or they can assign it to somebody else on the council. So I'm not sure that stating that they are the only person is the best way to put it. And then my other point, and maybe we covered this and I missed it, the council president will serve as the mayor pro tem. I don't remember if we covered that or if that was in there before, or is that something that I know if in the absence they do, but let's say the mayor dies. We've had pro tems that were council presidents, and I swear in the history, the council has voted other people to be pro tem. And so the fact in this case, it's automatically saying they are. I don't know if I totally agree with that, or maybe I missed the discussion.
But that was definitely part of the discussion, was the mayor pro tem, and that was the advice of this body, recognition of this body was to add that. But your other point is well said. Carol, please.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I like the word can or may, because different mayors are going to rely on their council in different ways. And so we need to kind of leave some flexibility for that, elected leader to decide what they want to share and who they want to share it with to help them, pick up some of their duties.
Thanks, Carol. And Jason, please.
I was just going to add to the conversation that I felt like we did have a fairly robust discussion about the mayor pro tem, and I actually think that I think we were trying to be a little more structured here and say, hey, when you're thinking about a council president, you need to think about that. That would be what would happen, and maybe not have it. I think the somewhat willy-nilly approach that we've had has served us for a long time reasonably well. I don't think there have been major issues or problems, but I think being a little more structured here and having a little more foresight and also a little more clear about what's going to happen should something happen is the right thing to do. And I think we talked about that, but maybe we don't have it written exactly the way we should. I don't know.
Thanks, Jason. And Jeanette, please.
I was just gonna say there's intent, because I know if there's a potential where the current council president may not want to serve as a mayor pro tem, then they should have the right to say no, but that may just be inherent. So we don't need to belabor that one.
Thanks, Jeanette. And Zachary, please.
I just want to agree with Patient Schneider on this point, because I mean, it feels like we've already cut the, council president's term a bit. So worst case scenario, they were like mayor for a year and they weren't that good. You always could elect a new president. And it's more likely than not to happen mid-year. And then worst case scenario, like, I don't know, if you don't have that pro tem or, takeover thing where if mayor weren't able to perform the duties and council president should, then it's like the council president can basically like reject their own position, and it doesn't sound is kind of right. Even though they, because like it's their job as council president to like lead when the mayor's not there. And if they don't have to do that, then it's like, what's the role of council president to me?
Thanks, Zachary. And Karen, please.
Yeah, my memory of it was that pro tem, we meant truly temporary, that so that somebody would be mayor immediately until the filling vacancy work could be done. So it seems like that's why we ended up with that.
That's exactly right. And then the vacancies clause would still be after that mayor pro tem. The mayor pro tem would serve until the vacancy is filled. Thank you, Karen. So it looks like Shelby has the live editing, so change it to will perform the duties of mayor and then may perform other duties of the mayor at the mayor's request. Kind of getting at that idea that while you have taken on council president, that part of the role is to perform the duties of the mayor's absence is not always the duty to just do as the mayor tells you for other tasks. Thanks for doing that, Shelby. So any other questions about council president? Okay. Moving on to terms. This remains unchanged except for the dates. So mayor and councilors' term of office will remain 4 years and begin on the 1st of January of the year they're elected. And then we talk through kind of how that will work for the new council positions that would be created with this charter. And this is very normal for a charter when you're adding council positions. This one says that one of the new positions in 2025, and then get into that regular cycle. So that first election year will be a very full ballot, but after that it will calm down, go back to the normal cycle. Any questions about terms? Tony, please.
Seems just real quick. So the office is being filled after we add those positions. They'll be in the 2024 election cycle, and then they will be taking office in 2025 and in 2026.
They will take both new positions will take office in 2025. Just one will be a 4-year term and one will be a 2-year term. And then the 2-year term will convert into a 4-year term in the 2026 election. Okay. Moving on to term limits, and wow, Shelby and I spent a lot of time on this one. So there's several changes that were made so that a mayor may not be elected or appointed to more than 2 consecutive terms. A councilor may not be elected or appointed more than 2 consecutive terms for no more than 4 total consecutive terms on council. And that the elected or appointed is pretty key because it means that if someone resigns a 4-year term, all 4 years still count towards their term limit. This group discussed for quite a while what a partial term. So if someone is elected or appointed to less than 3 years, that won't count. But it was very important to this group that it was greater than, not less than, as the distinction. That was something we talked about pretty extensively. And that terms are considered consecutive if there's less than a 2-year break. So it sets the reset period of a minimum of 2 years. And John, please.
Yeah, can you go back to 3.5? Sorry, I didn't get my hand raised in time.
Oh, sorry. Here you go. Terms.
So that's different than what you sent us.
It is because think we had the wrong years.
Because the 2026, maybe walk me through it. And the other to a 2-year term in the 2026 general election. So the first one, the 4-year, okay. That's not what you had sent us originally, so I was confused, so.
Right, yeah,
Now
so
I'm
what
getting
was,
it, so.
yeah, what was originally in there was contemplating a November 23 referral, in which case everything would start in January of 24. Because January, if we want it to start on January 1st, as opposed to starting midway through the year, the next general election is 2026. And so there would be a pretty significant delay with getting our new counselors on board if we have to wait until the 2026 election. So
Okay.
even though we would vote on it in 2024, this doesn't actually have those new members running in the 24 election. It has it started at the beginning of the new calendar year in 25, which means the next election is 26. So if we did want to start the new counselors earlier, our new charter effective date would have to be somewhere mid-year after the May election. So we can certainly do that, but I thought it was cleaner to have it January 1st.
Well, it is cleaner, but to me, isn't it easier? I assumed after this got passed, the November of 24 election, we'd have 6 counselors running.
Right.
Or elected, available after the election. And so from that standpoint, you're really deferring that whole thing 2 more years. So I know it makes it cleaner to do it on the 1st, but I almost would rather see us have more counselors sooner than that, than waiting all the way till January 27 to actually start that.
Right.
Another consideration is that there is a budget impact to adding 2 new counselors, and it may, and just I don't know if this is true, but it may be better to delay it a couple of years to allow for that impact.
Yeah, but it doesn't impact. Yeah, but it doesn't impact the current budget. It would be a new budget we would create. So it wouldn't impact the budget ending 6/30/24. It'd be the budget we do next year.
Yeah, the budget would be approved though before the May or it would be in
Yeah.
process pretty significantly.
And it won't be approved before then, because the council doesn't approve it until June,
Yeah,
so.
correct. Well, then this is definitely up for the group that a July 1 at the fiscal year effective date would also be fairly clean. Lindsay, please.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think it also helps just give like adequate time for adjusting like systems and processes. Adding 2 more council members is fairly significant when there has been 4 for such a long time. So I think just to do the due diligence and make sure it's kind of all in place and like the staff are ramped up for it. I agree totally with John that it'd be great to have people as soon as possible, because that was kind of the reason for us adding them. But maybe in this case, it's okay to kind of slow it down a little bit because it will be a significant change.
Thanks, Lindsay. And Zachary.
I agree with John and Lindsay too, and that, this is a big deal and it would be better to make it earlier, but I guess we have to kind of wait a bit later. And yeah, I'm just kind of happy to be part of this big change because it's going to really help Tigard, I hope, and bring a better future than before. Not to say that it was bad before, but it's going to get a lot better with 2 more perspectives.
Zachary and Jeanette, please.
Great. Thank you, Cam. Yeah, my recollection of discussion, we want them sooner rather than later because I know several of us who are on the council currently have multiple committee meetings and at least 2 to 3 of them overlap on the same night. And so part of it was to enable us to be more diligent on those different committees by adding a couple of counselors sooner. So I like the idea of being diligent and having time, but I think time could actually cost us a robust committee and board process.
Thanks, Jeanette. And Karen, please.
I feel like part of the conversation also was around when the filing started, and I was just looking it up. The filing starts June 1 for the November ballot. So it seemed like that was part of our conversation, was like fairness to everybody, but I agree that it does seem like 2026 is a long way off.
I'm not hearing a lot of consensus one way or the other. Do folks feel, I hear kind of a little bit of both, so I'm kind of interested in doing a vote to see kind of where we land on the January versus perhaps July 1. Does that sound okay? And Lindsay, please.
I guess just a quick question then, just because, you know, like you and Shelby and Carol would probably know more internally, you know, is that realistic to bump it up? Is that okay? Or like, it would just be helpful to hear your perspective too, in terms of like getting that all aligned. Because I'm just like making assumptions that it's a big deal to add 2 counselors, but maybe we can do it quicker, to Jeanette's point, you know, to get people in to help on these committees.
Shelby?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the May to July is a quick turnaround. And like Karen mentioned, filing deadlines are going to come first. And so that's going to be the quickest turnaround. Even if the charter is effective July 1, we won't actually have the new counselors until January 1st of the following year. And so I think on the staff perspective, we have time to, you know, get seats at the dais and all that kind of administrative stuff. And so I guess either one, I think from the staff perspective, is doable. You know, ideally it would be somewhere in the middle, but we don't have elections in odd number of years. And so we don't have that option. So we'll defer to what the group flags. And then we can also bring this, we'll talk a little bit later about our presentation to council, and we can flag this to the current city council too for their thoughts as well.
And Tony, please.
Yeah, I was wondering if it was procedurally tonight, if it would be possible to maybe have the 2 perspectives, because I'm kind of in the middle also, but I don't live in that world where I have to figure out how many days before we can get the people in the seats when that works, and how much of a challenge it is to get on get the things done in a day-to-day now that we're trying to get those extra spaces for that Jeanette was bringing up. So is it possible maybe that people could kind of state their case for why they feel the way they do as we maybe but prior to a vote or something? I just kind of would like to hear those perspectives. I mean, I hear John and I hear Jeanette, and I understand kind of the whys, and I understand, you know, what you're saying and what Shelby's saying, but I don't feel like I have enough information just throw out a vote, because I'm not on a committee where I can't make the meetings because there's not enough people, and I'm also, you know, don't know if there's enough time to get everything ready. So that's just, I'm in the middle.
Thanks, Tony. And Derek, please.
Just wondering if it ends up being the consensus of the group that we need counselors earlier rather than later. Is the current council empowered to appoint and then just have the regular election cycle take place in the subsequent cycles? I don't know the answer to that, but I wanted to float that as a consideration.
Thanks, Derek. And Jason, please.
I hadn't even thought about that idea, Derek. Maybe I should have, but that's interesting and creative. I think that this may not be a point, just as I'm thinking about the level of importance of it. You know, this is a one-time decision. There are some facets to it that are administrative and operational, and there's whatever the current council thinks. Like, I guess I'm just questioning whether we should put a lot of energy into this, or we should put up the 2 or 3 different options we've talked about. Say we didn't spend a ton more time on this. You can either appoint people, you can do this. There's no ideal solution because of our election cycle and the timing of this charter review. So just come into it with that, tell the council the 3 options, since Derek just added one, and say, pick an option or make up your own, and we move on. That would be my proposal.
Thanks, Jason. Margaret, please.
Okay, and actually, I'm just kind of confused. Just reading the language, it looks like 2 people are elected in January, but one is for a 4-year term and one is for a 2-year term. And so you still have 6 counselors. It's just that one of those is for the 4-year and one is for the 2-year. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so the issue of not, waiting 2 years for a counselor is kind of moot, at least according to this language. Is that correct?
No,
The issue, Margaret, has to do with the timing between when this charter hopefully gets approved and when filing for even year and odd yeared elections are. That's the issue I think the staff are trying to describe to us.
Okay. Thank you.
John.
Yeah, I won't
Please.
belabor it too much. I can deal with what Jason said and send it to them. I'm fine with that. Give them 3 options, but I still think sooner than later. To me, there's not a budget impact because it's in a future budget year. The election will be before the filing process, so people will know the results. And then even though the filing opens June 1, it goes through the end of August, so there's plenty of time for them. So I'm not overly worried about that. So I still think the sooner the better. So I would prefer to do it sooner, but if we want to give them the option, I'm okay with it.
I think we're leaning towards giving council all of the information, and that will be on September 18th. So I'll go, Tony will be our last comment, and then as long as no one disagrees, we'll table this and send it to council to make a final decision. Tony, please.
I think that was exactly my question, just to get, I think I've got it dialed in, but I think with what John said about Jason's comment. So the idea is that we're going to leave this language kind of in flux, and then we're going to give the council the ability to do what they feel fits best for the circumstances because they live in the day-to-day. Okay, perfect. That's good deal.
So highlighted that. Okay, term limits, and I think I'd already gone through the basics. We did have quite a bit of discussion. I know we've gone down a lot of rabbit holes around worst case scenarios, and we've definitely got some of those emails. Those definitely still exist, although there would be some very wild turns of events that would have to happen for folks to be regularly appointed to 3-year terms. So any other questions around term limits? Tony, please.
All right, I see that there's the maximum for the counselor, and I know we talked about this a lot, so I'm sure I'm missing something that we talked about, but it doesn't look like there's the same language for the mayor position. There's no maximum consecutives for the mayor.
So consecutive terms on council applies to mayor and councilor. Okay. They all serve on council. Thank you. Great question. Karen, please.
Yeah, I had shared some thoughts with Shelby earlier, and I just was going to point out that I feel like sentence number 2, talking about the partial term, like, is an exception to all of the language, so that if it's that somebody who's doing a term that isn't going to count towards the term limit calculation, that it also like overrides the consecutive conversation, just the way that it was written. So I don't know. It's that it could lead to somebody serving a really long time if it were interpreted that way. And I guess my only reason or my only concern with having something vague was that we were gonna have to leave it to the council to interpret again when we were trying so hard to be so crystal clear here.
So is your concern then that if a partial term is the exception, which it is written that way to be an exception, that was the discussion of this group, then kind of in like a bizarre case scenario, you have someone who's appointed to a 2-year term to fill in after someone leaves office, then they're elected to 4 terms, 2 as council, 2 as mayor, and then could potentially, before their break of service is complete, be appointed to another 2 or 3-year term. Okay. That is an opening is left in this current language. Zachary, please.
Yeah, so this is separate, but I had to flip my phone over so I can charge it because it's going low on battery. But like, you know, to the issue with Karen's point, I just want to say that I kind of agree that, you know, I was just seeing it now kind of because it's kind of hard to read all the lines all the time when we're following it down. But yeah, I can understand how that can be interpreted another way, and that could cause problems if someone just kind of keeps getting elected over and over again without really dealing with the term limits.
Okay, they wouldn't be getting elected over and over again, at least not to 4-year terms. It would be that there would be appointments that were happening midterm. Does anyone else share this? So we did talk a lot about some of these exceptions during our time together. So I understand that there is this odd possibility of something like 20-something year term, but it seems very unlikely. And it seems like this is something that the group had already decided to kind of be okay with that exception being available. Tony, please.
Yeah, and I share Karen's concern that you could end up with somebody that's appointed and appointed and appointed. But this kind of, for me, I'm kind of okay with that because they have to be appointed and they have to fit into that exception. But also, I think if somebody is bringing something to the table important enough that the existing council, you know, needs to rely on them to fill some sort of vacancy in that exception, I think I like the idea of not having a procedure preventing somebody that is really important to help keep the city moving.
All right, so let's move on. So this is the no interference clause. This is another new invention from this group. I shouldn't say new invention. This is in many other charters. But it is designed to address the issue of individual councilors using undue influence on the city manager rather than using their influence as a council to influence the city manager in day-to-day operations. I think the space that we spent the most conversation around has to do with how the penalties for this operation. And so this group's consensus was that a due process hearing would be required and a unanimous vote of all council members, with the exception of the member who is the subject of the vote, would be required to remove a member. So setting that bar very high for removal. This does not mean that other forms of discipline towards the offending counselor would not be available. Does not mean that the only possible discipline would be the removal of a council member, but that but up to the removal of a council member is available. And Tony, please.
I'm sorry, I'm very chatty tonight, I guess. When I read this in a manipulative kind of light, how I would look at it. One thing that's kind of interesting to me as I read it is it kind of appears to give an exception to no coercion if it's done during meetings. The way that I read that, it kind of looks like you can say anything you want during a public meeting, and it doesn't say you can't use coercion during that context. And maybe that's just me kind of manipulating the language a little bit. But what does kind of stand out to me is there's a prohibition against trying to coerce the city manager. But there's two other positions in there that are pretty important, the attorney and the judge. And there's no prohibition towards attempting to coerce those two positions. So it, to me, maybe there's a reason for that, but it kind of seems like in the relevance for the city, if we're going to say you can't coerce the city manager, but we're not going to call out those other two very important positions, it just kind of seems strange to me.
Thanks, Tony. And Zachary, please.
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna agree with Tony on that because it did just kind of say the city manager, and I was wondering if there would be any other possibilities of including other titles, or it just, was implied that it was all.
Thanks, Zachary. And John, please.
Tony, I just got back from the Oregon Mayor's Conference this weekend, and there was a city that I was talking to the mayor that currently there will be a lawsuit related to a counselor trying to coerce a city manager during a meeting. So that will be in process right now. So if you read it that way, that they can do it during a meeting and not otherwise, I don't think that's a good thing. I don't think it should be stated anytime they can, because it shouldn't be allowed anytime or anywhere.
Yes, I believe the intention of the last sentence of in council meetings, council members may discuss really has to do with the fact that council acts as a body, and so that the city manager. But that was the intention of that sentence. And Jason, please.
So Kim, just so you know, you're breaking up quite a bit. I think we're getting the gist of what you're saying, but there are some sentences where it's not entirely clear. So I think that I think the reason this is considered the way it is that on some level, sort of what happens in a public council meeting, you're doing that in front of everybody. So there's no secrets, right? Like you're literally doing it in front of the rest of the council and the mayor and, the city attorney. Like at some point it becomes a different act. Like, I guess I don't know what the nature of what John is describing from the OMA conference. Maybe that was more of a threat than a coercion. But I think part of what happens in public meetings, is spirited discourse and dialogue and discussion that, at times I think some could think of this way. Threatening is a whole different story, but I don't think that's what this clause is about. This clause is really about, in my mind, the root of this is about interfering in the day-to-day operations of the city. And that is what we're trying to avoid, because that is not the role of the members of the city council. And so that is what I think we're trying strongly to sort of prevent. And John Cook's giving me a thumbs up. And so that's the focus here. That's also kind of why the city attorney and the judge, though the judge, I don't know, judges are not, I'm not really sure coercion is from a city council. Well, I guess it could be. The judge one, maybe. I think the city attorney, the only reason that would be an issue would be if you were sort of trying to direct them around the work of their department, which is usually pretty small or non-existent in most cities. And so I'm not sure what that looks like in the city attorney's office. Maybe we just include all three so that there's no sort of question about it. But that's why I think the intent is to sort of prevent interference in operations, and generally the city manager is the one running the operations of the city, either directly or indirectly. So that's where I think it comes from.
Thanks, Jason. And we did spend quite a bit of time on this clause, so we're going to Derek, Margaret, and Jeanette, and then I think move on and take all of the comments under advisement, and it'll be part of the record. Derek, please.
Just to
affirm the positions of John and Jason. I mean, there's an element of parliamentary privilege that comes along with acting in an open forum where you're advocating for a position in the full spotlight of the general public. So I don't think we should be necessarily putting in any sort of limitations on people advocating for different positions when they're willing to do so under the, in full open view of everyone. And just to distinguish that from doing something in a more subversive nature, trying to interfere with city employees off the record, right? Very much what you do in public is part of the record. So I don't really want to stymie free speech for our counselors.
Thanks, Derek. And Margaret?
What my major concern is how this looks to the public. And I don't think it is right for any public body to go through and either be punitive or rude or, whatever in a public setting. If you've got something that you've got a concern with the city manager or a municipal judge or whatever, you go through and you do that in a proper way. You don't go through and do it in public. When it comes out in public, that becomes personal. And so it's just one of these hesitations as a citizen. I don't want my city council to do that. And I don't want to see that, period.
Thanks,
Be
Margaret.
adults, we're be adults, mature adults.
And Jeanette, please.
Thank you. I think I do like the what former Mayor Snyder had mentioned about adding potentially, I don't know if you were advocating for this, but just to make it clear that it's not just the city manager, but also the city attorney and the judge. But I think that could be an interesting idea.
Thank you, Jeanette. Yeah, we can make that change. It sounds like there was pretty good consensus around the group to include the other chartered positions. And Zachary, I am going to end our discussion on the no interference clause as promised. We are running low on time and I want to make sure we get through everything. And I don't want to re-litigate all of the decisions that we've made in this body over the last 8 months. Thank you.
So I do just want to add, I don't know if people saw the live editing while the discussion was happening. I recognize anything was a little broad to Margaret's and Tony's point. We don't want them to say anything in a public meeting. So I changed it to matters with the city manager to just make it a little more appropriate boundaries.
So moving on to council rules, this is a new requirement in the charter, though not a new practice for the city, which says that the council will adopt council rules. And then it does provide a discipline path if there are violations. It does not go up to removal of a elected official, but does go just south of that penalty. Jeanette, please.
So Kim, I'm wondering here if we can add what we were talking about earlier about the appointment of boards and committees that we can perhaps say suggested, because it says ground rules will include a code of conduct, will govern proceedings. So we can say will include a code of conduct. I don't know if we want to say, rules or what have you, but I think we can put it in there.
This would be the process for selecting
Yeah,
committee members. Yeah.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That sounds great. And it sounded like there was a lot of consensus around that. So absolutely. Shelby's already at work. So we did get some questions around compensation. So the current, what was in the charter currently around compensation was not in line with ethics law. And so we sent a long paragraph that explained kind of this change, but basically that it says that there needs to be a election between a change in compensation for a council member. Council member. So that's what this paragraph reflects, is being in line with the ethics rules that we were not in line with prior. Any questions? Jason, please.
Did we actually talk about this? Did I miss this conversation?
No, we put it in and then we sent an email around basically saying that we were just moving it to be in line with the with ethics, but open to the conversation.
I mean, I think a better method of this may be sort of a mini version of what the county is now doing, where we just designate the budget committee's community members as a salary commission, and that they do that separately without the council involved. But that's a very different way of thinking about this. This just seems so, I guess I'm worried that it's like if something gets really out of whack, and I don't know what that would be, because right now I don't think it's out of whack, but we also got to think about things that happen a long time from now. If something was really out of whack, we would want it to be corrected and be just and appropriate, and not, for example, lose good people just because they couldn't afford the childcare needed to, as an example, participate in public meetings. And I don't know what that would look like that would cause that. But, you know, when I first started on the city council, I believe the stipend was $253 a month for a city councilor, which was not really enough to even pay for babysitting and meals while you were at council meetings. And, you know, that's where we came from. That wasn't that long ago. And so what happens when we end up in that place again? Should everyone on that current council have to be gone before that can be corrected? That just doesn't seem right.
That's fair. And I think there's definitely some interest from our council in this particular clause, and we can definitely bring those options, including the county's option forward to council when we present.
I don't think it needs to be the full county thing. Like, I don't think we need a vote on this separately. I don't think we need a formal salary commission. Like, we have a budget committee with community members for a reason.
Good point. Thank you. And Karen, please.
Yeah, my only concern with the language here was that half of the counselors would be receiving a different rate than the other three counselors for 2 years, and thought that it should take effect after everybody's term was over. But I don't know.
Thanks, Karen. And Carol, please.
Yeah, that was my concern too, with, you know, them getting different rates at the same time. And I don't know if making them all wait is worth it. I just don't know. It just bothers me that there'd be, you know, just kind of that extra step for payroll, everyone to figure out, well, which group are you in? And I don't know.
Yeah.
And then by that time, maybe the others would vote for a raise, and then they'd be frozen for a while. So it just seemed a little problematic.
It's definitely a concern. And it's something that's in Beaverton's charter too. And we did reach out to them to see how they're navigating it. And it's their charter is also just so new that they haven't had this experience yet. So we're learning together, but maybe we can come up with a better solution. John, please.
So for the 20 years that I chaired the county budget committee, not the current rules because now they're paying everybody, but they actually did receive a salary. And the way it was required was the lay budget members had to make the motion and pass for the COLA increase even, or any other increase. And it had to pass through the budget committee, lay members. And then when it came to the total budget committee in June, everybody got to, you know, the commissioners got to vote on it. But the idea was the motion and the approvements came from them, and the current commissioners always just abstained from that. So you got a vote out of the commissioner or of what commissioner's salary should be. So I always thought that worked well. My other worry of this one is, you know, Jason was there when a counselor threw a grenade over the fence and said that the mayor should have no salary for the next 2 years, 4 years, 6 years. So from that standpoint, if the mayor's in the doghouse with the rest of the council and they can vote that in right then, I don't think that's a good thing either.
Yeah, that was a real problem. Yeah.
It's not great. Fair concern. Thank you, John. And Zachary, and then Tony, and then we'll move on to city officers. Zachary, please.
Yeah, well, I'm just thinking about the issue now, and I've been thinking about it before in terms of wage, because I saw our salary for counselors and it's a lot less than other cities. But well, I thought it was less. Wasn't it like 5,000 or something?
It's less than like a full-time counselor would be in a large city, but for a city the size of Tigard, it's pretty on par, from what I understand.
Yeah, but I mean, I was just looking at other ones and it seems like ours hasn't been changed in a while. But I was thinking there's some sort of minimum number we can come up with so that way they can't like change it to 0 at least or something. I don't know, just to ponder the idea. I don't want it to accidentally kind of go, right over our heads and then because, just to hopefully, get rid of our worries.
Thanks, Zachary. And Tony, please.
So maybe I'm reading this differently, or maybe I am reading it with the intent that I'd like to see in it is when I read this, it says the council must determine the compensation of the mayor and councilors, but no change in compensation is effective for the mayor or councilors in office during the council member's term when the decision is made. So I read that as if you say, hey, the mayor doesn't get any money, the next time that there's an election, that people wanting to be mayor see a position that has no funding. So that's how I'm kind of looking at that. And the same with a council position. If you're saying that there's going to be more or less or no compensation at the end of a councilor's term before they would start their next term, then they would be able to determine, do I want to run for this position again or do I not want to? Does that fit with my finances? That's kind of, to me, the way that I would kind of expect it to run, so that you can't say, hey, I don't like the mayor, I'm going to take his money away. Well, he has the option of he's going to get paid or she's going to get paid through their full term of their election, and then they can decide whether to run or not for the next election cycle. That's kind of how I was reading that, which may or may not be the correct interpretation.
Did we just lose Kim?
We lost Kim and Lindsay's in charge.
I have my hand up. Do I get to go? I guess
Yes.
it's for Kim.
Yeah, there's Kim. All right. Yeah, Jason, go ahead.
I think Tony, I think conceptually some of that's reasonable. I don't disagree with that, but it really creates a big equity problem. And a place that where we're trying to have representative government where everybody can participate, not just independently wealthy and retired people. Like, this is a real issue. And so I don't want our community to be in a place where we make a decision that we're no longer going to provide reasonable compensation for the huge amount of time that's spent doing all of this work. That's for me why I would want it. I would not want that kind of a move even ever made.
Thank you. So some good food for thought that we will bring forward. Moving on into city officers. And I am sorry that I hope my internet is a little more stable. It is very hot. We don't have air conditioning and my computer is complaining very loudly. So we'll struggle. So we decided to include 3 city officers, one being the city manager, who would be the administrative head of the city, responsible to the city council, and all of the work of the day-to-day operations. And I believe there was one alteration from the original language that Shelby and I had drafted, which was to include operations. And so we did make that add since the last time we spoke. Any questions about the city manager? Then in an ad that was added, it was, Zachary, please.
This is on a separate note. I just thought I'd clarify that my brother walked in, so I told him to get out. That's why I turned over and I'm pointing like, I don't know if you can see, but there's door right here. I just thought I'd let you know because I didn't want to seem unprofessional.
Thanks, Zachary. Karen, please.
Can you share the document
sorry.
again,
Yeah, of course,
please?
I was highlighting operations and everything.
Kim, if your internet becomes unstable, you can also turn your video off, and that seems to help. Because I've been having to do that on and off because we're in the same situation you're in.
Karen, please. Oh, okay. So moving on to city attorney, this was an ad. So the city attorney will be the chief legal officer for the city. Again, adding something into the charter that has already been in practice. Any questions? Comments? Okay. And then the municipal court and judges, and there were some significant changes in some of the terminology in this section, basically trying to future-proof for what happens if, for whatever reason, the judge's role expands or the court expands, and we have multiple judges. And I think Shelby can go into way more and better detail on that if there's questions. Tony, please.
And I don't mean this to be kind of flippant, but the very last sentence, I don't want to tie the council's hands, but at the same time, I don't know if there's a way to kind of put that last sentence in kind of subject matter or kind of in scope of what the position is, because it just says other duties and there's no frame for that. That's just the only comment I had. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Sorry, I think I missed Tony's comment, but Shelby, take it.
Yeah, Karen, go ahead.
I just wanted to clarify for my own, if we did get to the point where we needed a second municipal court judge, does the presiding judge hire and coordinate and supervise that person, or does council appoint the second judge?
So typically it is city council. And let me just confirm that that was my discussion, but yes, I believe it is city council. Derek, go ahead.
Probably a question for you, Shelby. I was just curious as I was reading through this over the weekend, when would the court enforce something that says in the first line, for example, the areas within the city and areas outside the city as permitted by state law are within the jurisdiction of the court? When would something that took place outside of the city fall within the purview of the court? Like, I'm not asking for a change here, but more just a curiosity on my part.
Yeah, so very rarely, but I could see a situation where maybe by an intergovernmental agreement, Tigard acted as the municipal court for another entity, where we agreed that our municipal code would apply in an unincorporated area. It would take a special agreement with that other area's government, and it would be pretty rare. But it's there to preserve the authority if it should happen. Zachary.
So I live in unincorporated Tigard. What would it take to incorporate unincorporated Tigard, and would it just be off the city council's like decision, or like the judges if they do incorporate it, or how would that work? Because
no, so yeah, no, like we've mentioned before, so annexation is a whole other process that's outside the scope of the charter. It is a separate legal process that is way more complicated than just the, well, it has no role with the municipal court judge. It's a voter decision.
Zachary, you can call John Cook or I if you want the details, or Counselor Shaw. I'm sure she'd be happy to too.
I'll defer to John and Jason.
Okay, so moving on from municipal court judge into elections. So we discussed in this group that elections are largely governed by state law. And so we've set that in section 5.1. In section 5.2, we had quite a bit of discussion about what would be a qualification for an elector and added or qualification for elector and then eligibilities 5.2 and 5.3. So a person is a resident of the city and is a legal voter under state law. But then also under eligibility, they must be a qualified elector under state law and have continuously resided within the city and be a registered voter of Tigard. Except when some other legal exception needs to be made. Any questions around comments around the qualification of electors? Okay. We've set the conduct of the election. There's no changes here. They'll be held at the general election. Candidates receiving the highest number of votes win. So it's a pretty standard election process. And John, please.
Yeah, I don't know where it really fits in. We're 5.3 or a whole separate number. And I'm not pushing for this. I'm just pointing out the city of Redmond will be putting forward a charter amendment to not allow spouses to be members of the council together. And so it's something I think in the city of Detroit, Oregon, it made total sense that husband and wife were on the council together because you've only got 500 some people, and right now there's only 200 or so that live there. But of a 50-some thousand population city, do we want spouses? Just a thought, just because some of the other cities are starting to think of that now.
Interesting. Thanks, John. And Tony, please.
I had a question about the last sentence in 5.4. It seems to, I don't see the necessity for it because the preceding sentence says that if you're a counselor and you get the most votes, you get the office. And I don't know what the difference, why you would need to say that if it's for a less than a 4-year term, just because it's always going to be whoever gets the most votes. So I just was curious.
Yeah, so the reason is that they appear separately on the ballot. And so if you run for a 2-year term, you have to sign up for that when you file your election paper. And if you sign up for a 4-year term, that's a different position. So we want to make sure that it's clear that it's the top vote getter for each of the positions, not the top vote getter out of everyone who runs for a council position.
Great question. Carol, was that the same answer you were going to give?
Yes, exactly.
Thanks, Carol. All right, moving along into vacancies in office. So we did, again, spent quite a bit of time here. Let's set A through H. So death, resignation, recall, seeking to reside in the city, ceasing to be a qualified elector, adjudicated incompetence, conviction of a felony, an absence for 30 days from regular meetings. And I did want to point out again that number H was a carryover from our old charter, and that this group did not find consensus around how to maybe reconstruct that. So we are already bringing that forward to council as an area that they'll need to consider or could consider. Any other questions around vacancies in office? Comments? Jason?
Yeah, I guess I just think that like when the presentation to the council is being done, like we should be really clear about the things we couldn't come to consensus on. I think you guys are probably planning on that, but like, I don't want the council to think, oh yeah, we thought that was good the way it was. Like, that's very different than saying, this is so controversial, we couldn't come to consensus. Like, and so it's in here.
Yep, thank you. We'll make sure there's a section of the presentation. And then 5.6, we did, this body did recommend keeping the filling vacancies, giving a full discretion to the council on whether to fill that vacancy through appointment or election. Any questions, comments, concerns? Okay. Moving on to Article 6. This is largely kind of going back to Article 1 and 2, a more pro forma. So rules of meetings, council adopts rules. They do not conflict with law or the charter. Quorum, as guided by state law, needs to have over a majority. The record of proceedings is required as required by state law. Voting is required and it must be public. And then there's an ordaining clause. So any questions about kind of 6.1 through 6.5? So getting into 6.6. Oh, Karen, please.
Yeah, in 6.2, just the second part of the in the event sentence, I wasn't totally clear on who's losing contact. If it's I don't know, it seems like we don't have a subject there. Is it a council member has lost contact, or the city has lost contact with I just wasn't quite sure who the subject of the sentence was.
Yeah, it's a great note. We can make that more clear. Going into 6.6, this we talked about this, I think, in our second, maybe third meeting, the adoption of ordinance. So a duly noticed public hearing is required. Reading of the ordinance by title only in a open council meeting. So one reading of an ordinance and then a roll call vote to adopt. We did have quite a bit of discussion around this topic in that very early meeting we had. And Margaret, please.
My one question, just what was the discussion around what the definition of a duly noticed public hearing would be? Is it 30 days? Is it 2 weeks? Is it, yeah.
It's as provided by state law.
Okay, got it. That makes,
Depending on what the thing has to do with. Yeah.
got it.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Great question. And then at the record of votes, the mayor must sign the ordinance, and then the city recorder attests to the adoption. And the ordinances will take effect 30 days after adoption, unless there is an emergency clause. Any questions about 6.7 or 6.8? Moving on to Article 7, public improvements and debt. And this was another early meeting, and largely this group recommended to defer to state law for improvements and debt limits, and then to continue to defer to ordinance for special assessments, which was in keeping with the current charter. Any questions, comments, or concerns? Okay. And then moving on into Article 8, and thank you, Jeanette, for the advice to turn off my video. I don't like doing it, but I will. So ordinance continuation, pending matters, separate. To essentially say that when this charter comes into effect, that does not cancel any previous actions that were taking place. Any questions about 8.1 and 8.2? Moving into 8.3, this is severability. This says that the charter is not one document that is an all or nothing. Things, any provision can be held invalid. That doesn't invalidate the entire charter. It only invalidates that specific clause of the charter. Any questions? And then we have the time of effect. So the charter will take effect 30 days after the day on which it is approved by a majority of voters, except as otherwise provided, is January. So this is saying that it's January 1, 2025. And we've already discussed taking this to council and maybe amending that date to July 1, 2024. And then all charter provisions adopted for this charter takes effect, continue in force, and that any charter provisions adopted that are repealed, that will also go into effect on the date that the charter goes into effect. John, please.
Yeah, I would like to talk about, Shelby mentioned this a meeting or two ago, but how do we put something in here, maybe miscellaneous provisions, but in a lot of charters, you see how basically it talks about how to amend or change the charter. And I would like to make it be at least 60% of the vote to change it in the future and require it be on May and November elections. Different things that we can do to make it harder for just one-offing so one group doesn't come in, fund an election in February, and only their people come out and vote and something happens. It's happened way too often in the past. So how can we change this? And I've read that in a few other charters that say that charters can only be changed on major elections. I would prefer even limiting it more than that, but unfortunately, like in November, Tigard might not have anything on the ballot, but somebody else might. So we wouldn't have to pay a lot. But special elections are just really tough.
Thank you, John. And Margaret, please.
Yes, I'd like to echo what John said, because I think if you look in what the current charter, there's a lot of things in there that were really kind of political for a certain group of people and got it into the charter. And then, it eventually termed out. But I think it's very important. I mean, the charter is something that is, I won't be as dramatic and saying, it's a sacred document or whatever, but it is. It's really important. It gives the guidelines for our elected officials and for our city staff. And so I think it's very important that we look at this as a group, as opposed to maybe just a singular group that wants to come in and put something in the charter that just affects them and not all of us people in Tigard.
Thank you, Margaret. And Jason, please.
I would just say that, I really do think of the city charter as the Constitution, and we don't allow the Constitution of the state or the US government to just sort of willy-nilly be changed by a random referendum that's voted on it by a simple majority of people. Like, I don't think that's allowed for any of those things. And so I think it's reasonable to think through this. I also think maybe it'd be reasonable, maybe if we can't get there with, some 60% of the vote or some version of something like that, maybe we say charter provisions that are added that aren't on a major ballot are only good for a year or two or something. They're only in effect for a short period of time. That'd be one way of maybe managing or mitigating that, to just sort of keep poor language mostly out of the charter, because I know we can't stop it altogether. But if it's truly done, as some of these have been done in, I think what we would say is really from a good governance perspective, or kind of done in a manipulative way, we don't want that in our charter. We don't want manipulative things that were, sort of targeted about one issue paid for by a bunch of people who don't even live here. I just that's what we're trying to avoid.
Thank you, Jason. And Derek, please.
Just to add my voice to the chorus and echo the concerns of Margaret, John, and Jason, something like a 2/3 majority, or I like Jason's idea of like a forced 5-year sunset or something of that sort. I concur with the prior speakers.
I would set it at 60%, not at 65 or 2/3. I think that starts to be a big burden, maybe. I don't know. We should talk about that.
Thanks, Jason. I can't even see anyone else's video now. However, I am hearing consensus.
Karen is up.
Thank you. Karen, please.
I just wanted to make sure that what we're talking about is for a specific amendment, because I don't want the next charter review committee to have to get 60% to get a new charter in. Just checking.
I don't think we're talking about stuff referred by the council. I hope we're not.
Zachary and then John.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what pretty much everyone was saying about how there should be some sort of percentage or something required, so that they can't just throw out another, charter review group to kind of replace ours really fast, because it should be something that happens every once in a while, but only actually when it's like necessary, because wasn't it like over 50 years ago or 60 that we've had a charter like this? So it should stay pretty relatively long before we need to revise it again.
John?
Yeah, Shelby, is there a way we can write it where if it's referred by the council, it's one way? And if it's an initiative petition, it's another?
Interesting question. Let me look into it, but
I don't know why.
Yeah.
I think that's sort of where we're going on this
Yeah.
discussion.
yeah. Yeah, I think it makes sense, especially if we're talking about a charter review committee. It's a totally different process. So yeah, I think we should try for that.
Any referendum, Shelby. I mean,
Yeah.
the burden should be different in my mind. Sorry, I'm interrupting, but I think the burden should be different for a referendum. It's a different thing.
Thank you. So what I'm hearing is a couple different questions, but the first one is that there should be a clause in this charter that addresses how future amendments to the charter are made, are approved. Does this group generally agree with that? Is there anyone who feels strongly that that should not exist in this charter? Okay. And so then the second question becomes, do we then treat general referendums different from, or referendums different from council referred charter amendments? Does everyone agree?
Like
Okay.
most thumbs up.
And then, okay, I'm seeing all the thumbs. I can see things again. And then the last questions really have to do with what are those potential extra hurdles that would need to be crossed for referendums. I've heard two options, and either or both could be included. One being requiring a 60% vote in order to approve a referendum. How do folks feel about a 60% vote? Anyone feel strongly against it? I'm seeing a lot of thumbs up. Does anyone not agree with a 60% requirement? Tony, please.
I think the point was touched on a little bit. I guess the question would be maybe for Shelby, what that majority number is that you're trying to get to that highest thing that is least likely to be considered overly burdensome so that it kind of gets challenged in court. If we're kind of in that area, that's really my question is 60 kind of at that threshold, or where is that kind of sweet spot of where you can say, not 99.9% of the vote, because that's not going to fly. So that's really my question.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there is a magic number, but 60 is pretty consistent across the board with other charters. So I would say 60 is a good number to land at.
Is everyone comfortable with 60? And then the other question was requiring the referendum to come forward during a general election, which would be the May or November election. And Jason, I see you shaking your head.
I guess I wonder if we really have to do that if we're making the 60% burden there. Maybe it's 60% at a May. Actually, I like this idea of John Cook's and other people's. I'm good with that.
Okay. Margaret, please.
I'm just concerned with the cost of an election that's on an off county election, because usually that the city would have to take the entire financial burden for that. And I think it would be very, very expensive. I guess I'm assuming it's going to would be very expensive to do an election just by ourselves. So I would want it more with a general election or a primary, or just an election that's being run either on the state or a county level.
Do folks agree with Margaret on trying to see when we would require referendums to be in the vein of what is the least budget impact to the city? Does anyone strongly disagree? Okay, Shelby is quickly writing now, but we will, in our follow-ups with all of you as well as the council, there will be a last provision that goes into how amendments may be referred to. The amendments to the charter may be referred and approved. And with that, that's the end of that's the charter. We did it. Y'all built from scratch a charter. So our next topic for this evening is next steps. So what happens now that we have this document that has been created? And first thing that's coming up is we're going to council on September 19th to present all of this work, talk about the areas that are significant changes, talk about the smaller changes, talk about the areas where this group did not reach consensus and we would like to have council weigh in. So it is September 19th, council meetings start at 6:30, and we would appreciate having as many of you in the room joining either in the room or online as possible. But the second request is that we would really like to have several of you present with Shelby and I, present all of this amazing work that this group has done together. The commitment would be pretty limited, be meeting obviously that night, preferably in person, and then probably 2 prep meetings to one kind of set the just make sure we're kind of in line with what the topics are going to be, and then a run through before the council meeting. So is there anyone who would like to volunteer to join Shelby and I at the dais or in front of the dais and talk about the work? And Zachary, are you raising your hand to volunteer? Anyone else would like to join Zachary?
I would nominate other people.
When is this?
Is that allowed?
You absolutely can nominate other people. It's September 19th. It is a Tuesday. And Jason, who would you like to nominate?
Yeah, I'd like to nominate. I'm just thinking like good presentation, kind of lots of groups represented. I'd like to nominate John Cook, Lindsay, and Margaret Doherty.
All right, and Jeanette, please.
Well, I would like to add to that list Derek. Not sure how many we can have, but I think that'd be a good list.
I saw Derek raise his hand, so I know he's interested. Okay, so we've got Derek, Zachary, and then Margaret, John, and Lindsay. Are you interested in joining? Or are you available? Is this something that you would like to do? Do not feel that you must.
I have it on my calendar, but I think it's really important that we have kind of faces that the council's not used to seeing. And I think that really shows that this was an all-city discussion and work and that kind of thing. So that's where I think Derek would do a great job.
Agreed.
So I'll just put in a plug that our last standing committee
Exactly.
like this that council had, it was the majority of the board that actually came up and sat at the table for the presentation. So Public Safety Advisory Board, it was most of the members there. So I welcome more.
To Margaret's point though, even if we do that, her point about who should be speaking is still on point.
Yes, yes, but presence does matter.
We want everyone to show if you are at all available. Just who has the time to be able to get ready for the presentation along with us. So Lindsay, did you want to join?
Yeah, I am free and I can make that work to prep with you and Shelby.
So Margaret and John, it sounded like maybe you were declining the nomination, but you'll be there.
Yeah, I'll be there. So
I will be there, and if you want me at the prep meetings, I can be there too.
yeah.
And Tony, are you
I
volunteering?
apologize. I know it's been said and it'll probably be out there, but I missed the time of the day.
6:30.
6:30 p.m.
Okay. I unfortunately I won't be able to be there. I have a prior commitment on that exact day, so I apologize. But I would love to be there for them.
Similar to these meetings, it is recorded and online. And you're free to also submit public comment if you would like as well. And Margaret, please.
The one thing I would like to think, I think it would not be a bad idea for the current city council to hear from former mayors who have gone through this entire process and can put a little more practical spin on what we've been working on. So that's just a suggestion for a speaker.
That was why I nominated John, so I didn't have to.
Yeah.
Do it. I had a similar thought, Margaret, but I do think like having it led by Zachary, Derek, Lindsay would be very powerful.
Yes, absolutely.
Great. So Zachary, is there Zachary, Derek, and Lindsay expect to hear from me. And then I will continue on. Our second request is that once we have this presentation to council, then the work really gets started. We have to run a campaign. We gotta get this out. We need to teach the rest of the city the things that this group already knows and get this body of work passed in May. So if any of you are especially interested in being involved in the campaign and getting out in the community, please reach out to me. This is not the end of your Thursday emails from me, I can promise. I know you thought you were off the hook, but you're not. And I'll continue to send updates and requests for bodies and to come and speak about this great work that you've all done. Shelby, do you have anything to add?
I guess I just want to say that this will be an opportunity for you to be involved to the full extent or minimum extent that you want to. We're definitely, when Kim says campaign, we're not talking about some vast political machinery here. We're talking about, would you be willing to, stand with one of us at the farmer's market or be at a table at the police open house one day, something like that. So if there's any opportunities that you would be interested in, something that fits your interest, let us know and we'd be more than happy to accommodate the extra assistance.
Shelby. And John, please.
Yeah, so the people that don't know, the city employees can't promote they can help write it from the background. They can help organize things that are very generic. They can't take a stand one way or another, and they can't promote for it one way or another. So elected officials can, prior elected officials, the public. So things that would be helpful, like you say, showing up at events, maybe putting a letter to the editor in the online or newspapers, promoting it on your Facebook page or Instagram or wherever else. So those are the kind of things we're talking about. I don't think we're talking about raising money and putting a whole bunch of lawn signs and things like that. So I think it's just basically explaining to the public, hey, John Q. Public here, John or Joan Public feel that this is important and we should change these things. And the more of you that stand up and say that, other than the more of the Jeanettes, me's, and Jasons that say that, it will sound better.
Thank you, John. And Jason.
The city has to be neutral or objective, and the city staff have to do that. So I also want to make sure that people know that standing at the farmer's market and talking about what we did and why we did it for so long and why we came to the conclusions we did doesn't have to be intimidating. Please don't think of it as intimidating. These kind of one-on-one interactions where you know a lot more because you've been part of the content should not be something that's intimidating to anybody. I know it could feel that way, but when you get the hang of it, it's just not like, the content. You don't need any more preparation. You just lived this. So you're prepared. You're ready to talk about it. You can talk, you can even give your opinions versus, I sometimes did this when I was mayor. I would describe my perspective and then also describe the council's perspective if it was different. And you could do the same thing here and say, my perspective was this is ultimately what we agreed on, or is it one of the topics that we couldn't agree on? And just kind of talking the public through that. This is the public education campaign that is objective and part of the city. There may be more of a political campaign that the city staff and the city itself are not directly involved in. People like John Cook, Jeanette, myself, Margaret Doherty, and Karen Emerson actually in the past have been pretty involved in those kinds of activities. And so depending on how we're feeling about this, that could be something that is also happening, but that is distinctly separate from the city's efforts to simply objectively educate people on what would happen or not happen depending on the vote.
Thank you, Jason. And Margaret, please.
I think one of the things that's really important that's always impressed me about the city of Tigard is they have an idea, they have a proposal, and then they bring it to the public, and they have lots of community meetings. And whether it's community development right now, or whether it was to build a library or this kind of thing, they're always real open saying, this is what it is, this is what we plan to do. and then they follow through and do it. So even community meetings where people say, this is the process we went through. I mean, we went through 15, 16 meetings with a diverse population from the city of Tigard. So community meetings are also, that are open to the public, is also another really good means that Tigard has to get information to the public.
Yeah. And Shelby and I are looking for support, so it's not her and I going to 50+ community meetings, trying to engage as many of you as possible, but we'll be there as much as we need to be. All right, thank you. And thank you to the folks who have already emailed me expressing your interest. Really appreciate that. So let's see, just concluding our last 22 minutes together as a group, I thought it would be fun just to hear from you all. What is something that really surprised you going through this process around the charter, and just as our kind of wrap up conversation? And Nathan, are you getting us started?
I'm actually going back to the next steps real quickly. So during our discussions, we also talked a little bit about some ideas for things we thought maybe the council should consider as ordinances. So for instance, like how long until the next review? Is there a list of those things available? And should we go over that?
I think we have the list in our minutes. We'll just need to go through that. We're in the process of kind of collecting all of the decisions that the group has made into one big document, but we'll be sharing those as we do that. Thank you for bringing that up.
So for what it's worth, I just want to emphasize, I really think we should recommend some sort of, minimum time frame under which we review this again.
You don't want to wait 60 years for the next charter?
Well, I don't think I'll be waiting 60 years.
No, I won't.
Fair enough. Thank you, Nathan. And Carol, please.
Oh, I just wanted to start off with a reflection question. And my response is I was really impressed with, with everyone and just the knowledge that, electeds bring in, but the community members that came forward and had these great thoughts, great ideas. It was just fascinating how, we could talk about touchy things. Sometimes we didn't reach a consensus and things stayed the same. But I thought Kim was an awesome facilitator, and I really appreciated seeing the community come together and come up with these great ideas and great input. So that's what I enjoyed so much.
Thanks, Carol. And Zachary, please.
I just want to say to any kids that are watching or any kids that want to get involved in government, you can do it. I mean, I honestly decided I wanted to, even like freshman year of high school, but it was really hard because I didn't have a car. And, I worked really hard to try to get all the stuff organized and, yada, yada. And I had IB stuff to do in high school, but, hey, it started with getting involved in the community. It started with TIAC. And yeah, it just starts with that motivation to volunteer and want to help people. And you never know what you might get. And I just want to thank everyone for being a part of this and being able to let me be a part of it, because it's really awesome. And I'm interested in seeing all this through, including the after stuff too, and be a part of the campaign.
Zachary, thank you for being so engaged as a youth member of the committee. It was really valuable, and you see all the hands clapping. You asked great questions. You pushed the adults in ways that they should be. You're going to be one of us very soon if you aren't already. I know you're probably close, and just really appreciate your engagement.
Thank you. So I'm just going to start going around, but if you don't want to share, feel free to decline. But Holly.
I think for me, one of the biggest surprises I had were the number of times I was at home reading things, and just based on, like Carol said, the great questions and the conversations, how many times I changed my mind. about things that I thought, oh, this is the way it should be. And then hearing these conversations and a complete 180 from what I thought, just having those conversations, I thought that was a really incredible. And I just also jotted down that the great thoughts and provoking discussions like Carol mentioned, and then just the history of Tigard and the charter and how it got to where we were. I just thought all of that was fascinating. So I've really appreciated being a part of the process.
Thanks for being here, Holly. And Tony, please.
Yeah, I can't say that I was particularly surprised kind of to where the question was, because I kind of with the people that were probably in the first meeting, I think that you could see where people were coming in, they were engaged, and they, everybody kind of spoke to what needed to happen, and everybody, even when there was disagreements, we kind of just that's kind of felt like Tigard. I mean, Tigard tends to work a little more that way, where people don't get overly dramatic and fuss and fight too much. At least that's my experience in Tigard. But people tend to get along a little bit better here, and if you disagree, you just kind of disagree and you move on, and everything just works out. So I really appreciated the things that we accomplished. There was some discussions were very long, and but we had stuff to get through, and we got through it, and that was really cool. And I really appreciate Kim and Shelby and that kind of interaction with the answering the questions that are very specific and legal, and also how our charter compares to the other charters. So I really appreciated the entire process.
Thanks, Tony. John.
Yeah, two things. One, I really want to thank the staff, because the homework that you don't see, that you see the meetings, time and effort that you guys put in, and maybe you did some reading also, but reviewing 20 other charters and finding other things and doing research, there's a lot of behind the work that you don't see, and I really appreciate that. The one thing I can say is the people that comment that every time the city puts something forward, it's just those 5 counselors came up with something on their own, and they wanted it this way, and it's a done deal. They made the decision behind closed doors. You never saw it in the public. And if anybody says that, we can let them watch these 40, 50 hours of meetings. The thing I like the best is it wasn't 11-0 votes all the time. I like the 6-5. I like the 8-3s. I like the discussion. So, there's too many times when if everybody's the same, you're not thinking about it enough. And so the fact that we have disagreement, the fact that people think things out of the box, the fact that maybe you got voted down a bunch of times, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just the idea is you're bringing your ideas forward, and the majority of the people are moving forward what we feel the majority of the people in Tigard will want and live with for the next 10 years, approximately. And I think that's the most important thing. So I think the most important thing to let the public know is this just wasn't drawn up in a box and handed to them. So.
Thanks, John. And Karen, please.
Well, I think the thing that did surprise me the most was the variety of content that's out there in all of the other cities. When all the homework that you provided, it was like, holy cow, this city does this city does this. And I think we'd like to say that it's because the community has a certain value or something, but it was just still very interesting how diverse some of the issues that you brought forward were. And I definitely appreciate all of that homework and gathering that you did.
Thanks, Karen. And Nathan.
Well, real quickly, I'll also echo just how much behind the scenes work I can only imagine was going on, because I bothered you guys with a lot of emails, I know. As far as surprising things, I struggled to think of anything I found surprising, but just kind of the theme that I kept coming back to. I'm an avid people watcher. It's been very interesting to me watching the social dynamics of the group, because it's a very intensive and focused task. and just kind of the dynamics of the group came together very quickly, and it was just fascinating to watch. I don't know what else to say about it apart from it was enjoyable and interesting.
And Dolly, please.
Nothing. Well, surprise? No, I wouldn't say anything surprise. I appreciate all the work. I appreciate all the research. I ditto on everybody's comments. For me, my tongue-in-cheek eyebrow raising is at least I get to go back out and say that John's already smiling at me like, hey, I'm the affirmative action person in here. You know, it might not be the politically correct thing to say, but you know, when other people of color look at me and say, well, you know, especially in Tigard, because that is what I get. When people of color think there's no opportunity to have a seat at the table, I get to go back out there and say, well, guess what? There is, and I'm part of it. I'm proud of it. I have to say that although I was very sad that I was non-voting in anything, I was glad that at least the votes that I would have voted on anyway were the ones that passed in the vote that I would have done. So that was compensation. But I very much appreciate having a seat at the table. And even if it's just for statistical purpose, I can, you know, you can say that, hey, there's a non-white person here. Ta-da.
Thank you, Dolly. Thank you for so many contributions throughout this process. And Jeanette.
Thank you. And thank you, Dolly. Really appreciate you voicing that and raising that as well. I guess not so much a surprise, but the respect that each person showed each other, I think was really fantastic, has helped restore my faith in the human being. But I'd also like to thank staff too. I know how much time it takes, and that's a lot of time. And I think we had a lot of discussion about individuals and about community. And for me, it's all of us individuals coming together and really continuing to build the betterment of our community. And that just provides me with so much hope. And I do believe it's community first, and we as individuals make up that community. And I'm just really proud to have been on these different meetings every Monday, and look forward to hopefully we can continue that while we all work on our different parts of the campaign. Putting a plug in there for you, Kim.
Appreciate that. And Margaret.
Okay, a lot of the people have already said that. First of all, the staff, very open, very helpful. And I think sometimes the staff doesn't get the appreciation and the recognition that they have. Second of all, it is obvious that the members on this committee really care about their city. And I think that is extremely important. And we are special in Tigard. We really are. The respectful attitudes amongst committee members. But the only problem now, I am not going to know when it's Thursday, because we're not going to get Kim's emails with the agenda. So I'm just all messed up now. I don't know when Thursday is going to be, but we appreciate that. Good job, everybody.
Don't worry, it's not the end of the Thursday emails yet. That's okay. Lindsay, please.
I think the thing that was surprising, and please don't take offense to this, was actually like how interesting and engaging this whole process was. This is a fairly dry topic, reviewing a city charter. And I think that just speaks to the amount of thought and effort that you and Shelby put into this. Every meeting I left like feeling very engaged. And this is, you know, at the end of a Monday for 2 hours. That's, you know, kind of a tough ask. But like doing breakout rooms and having more in-depth discussions, I think especially for the lay citizens who got to interact with people with direct experience, you know, whether it was staff or elected officials or previously elected officials. So I just think that dynamic worked really well, where I never felt like, oh, I can't ask this question because I should know it. You know, that everyone was happy to kind of explain and set that foundation. So just excellent work. And I really enjoyed the process. Thank you.
Thanks for being here. And Derek, please.
Just for my part, supremely grateful to have been able to be a part of the process, and just want to extend my gratitude to everyone who came together to come up with what I think is a pretty good product that we can all be very, very proud for, investing our efforts in over these past several months. I don't think I'm necessarily surprised by anything, but I think that the general public might be surprised, right? What I think that at the high level, we consider a lot of politics through a partisan sort of lens. I don't really think that a lot of that was really present here. I think that this is a testament to what a good group of people who are motivated can come together and find common ground on things and again, put together something that we can all be very proud of. So I'm grateful for being considered for the position and accepted by the council. And I've thoroughly enjoyed the time that I've been able to spend with everybody here.
Sarah, and Margaret.
This is real quick. My last thing I didn't say is thank you, former Mayor Cook, for letting me come over to your house so I have internet because I still don't have internet Xfinity in our area. So anyway, thank you, John, very much for loaning me your spare bedroom so I can be a part of the meeting.
Yes, thanks, John. And Dolly.
Oh, one last thing I forgot to say. Consider this your official invitation to speak at CPO4, because I'm on that board, CPO4M, and for the Committee for Community Engagement. So there you go. There's your first places that I'm officially inviting you to talk about it.
We will get on this agenda soon. Thanks, Dolly. And Jason, you are our last member.
Well, I wasn't expecting that to be the last. I would say what was surprising to me was, I think about this kind of work. I know, Lindsay, you made a comment that made me chuckle inside a little bit about how sort of the dryness of this. Anyone that's been on the city council for a long period of time is definitely going to be kind of excited and energized about these kinds of topics because of how much it's affected us over time and or affected the city that we helped govern. And so there's a lot of passion there, despite the fact that I would agree with you, most people would see it as pretty dry. With that said, I approach this kind of work both with a fair bit of passion and also a desire to try to be as creative in problem solving and working through things. And I think I was surprised. I mean, the online format was not my preference for this reason, actually. I really wanted to, I think this work is actually done, both the quality and speed of the work is done better in person. And I still think that. I know that's not what we obviously ended up doing, and I think we got there. I was surprised, at least at the beginning, the first few meetings, about how difficult I felt like it was to have the kind of meetings we needed to have to get to a good product. And maybe that was some of me just needing to adjust. I just don't think this kind of work, when you're trying to do really kind of creative and collaborative work in the sort of confines that we had, where we couldn't even sort of add comments or add sort of layers onto someone else's comment in an efficient way, or really at all, other than raising hands, taking notes, and then trying to say it. I was just surprised at how, at least initially, challenging that was, maybe just for me to adjust to. You all saw it, probably the first couple meetings, it was a real struggle for me. And I do think we could have gotten done faster. And I don't know about a better product, because I think what we did was pretty good, but some of it was a little more painful, I think, than it needed to be to get there. And by painful, I mostly mean the amount of time it took.
Thanks, Jason. Well, it is 7:26 and I've never kept you after 7:30. Thank you all so much for your commitment to this process, for showing up. I think the thing that surprised me the most is that there are still 11 voting members who are here, which is absolutely incredible, given that we went over by 3 meetings. And that's all 11 voting members. And Dolly, please.
Oh, I just wanted to take a screenshot. So if you would all take a smile. That way we have a document of, although I could pull it out of the recording, but it's clear. Okay, hold on. I'll take a screenshot. Or do you want to do it, Kim?
I'll do it.
All right.
Everyone say cheese.
There you go.
Okay, got one.
That'll be good for the campaign, Kim.
So I also just want to echo, it was a fantastic group to work with. Thank you for all of your efforts. You know, when Kim and I are working on compiling the homework, sometimes we were thinking, are they ever going to read this? And then somebody, often Karen, would be, well, section 13G of the Grants Pass Charter says this, so maybe we should add this to our charter. And Kim and I were always super impressed that everything that we had worked so hard to come up with was actually acknowledged and used. So thank you for that. It was a great product, I think, that we got, and you all put a lot of hard work into it. So congratulations.
Okay, thank you so much, everybody. Expect to hear from us, and look forward to seeing as many of you as can join at September 19th council meeting.